Hello everyone and welcome back. I wanted to wish you Happy New Year. I'm so excited for 2019 because I have so many ideas for my channel and I think that you guys will love them. A quick reminder before we begin, for more videos, prints and behind the scenes photos you can visit my Patreon and become a part of my Patreon family with only $5 a month. And also, for the artwork you see now on screen, is available as a print at my Etsy store along with the special edition prints and other prints and originals. You can find the link below. Today's video is a collaboration with my friend Nightmarish Tales, who is a very kind person, a great friend and a very talented narrator. So please follow the link below, visit his channel and tell him I sent you. But before you leave, don't forget to grab your flashlight, because you're about to step into the darkness. This event happened when I was 13. I think it was around maybe September or October. Well, anyway, this is my story. It was a Thursday evening around 7 p.m. My parents were going out for the evening. My mother was going to her exercise classes, and my dad was in football training with my brother. I have always been a bit of a scaredy cat. I never used to go upstairs alone in the dark. I was always paranoid and I was always scared of being home. But it was better than standing on a cold field in the rain, I guess. Well, anyway, I was sitting in my living room playing The Sims. I was obsessed with it. A few hours had passed, and I was still at my computer desk. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I was always told to ignore it if anyone came to the door when I was home alone. Even if I was allowed, my fear of strangers would have kept me from opening it anyway. I turned off the volume of my game and waited for the person to go away. Less than a minute later, the bell rang again and again. At this point, I started to get scared. Usually, if we are expecting someone, my mother will text me or phone me, but I hadn't been informed on any visitors. I decided to turn off all the lights and sat in silence. I lived in a sketchy area with some dodgy people, so that didn't help. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the kitchen window, which was around the side of the house. At this point, I was freaking out. I ran to my bathroom as it was the only room in the house that had a lock, so I locked myself in and hid in the shower with my phone. I stayed silent for a while until I heard a clatter, and then my backyard security light turned on. Someone was in my garden. I could see a silhouette through the window. I broke out into a cold sweat and phoned my mother. I knew she would not answer because she wouldn't hear the phone over the music in her class. I rang my dad, but to my shock, I heard a phone ringing from in the kitchen. He had left his phone behind. I instantly hung up. I stayed there for a while, crouched in a ball. I could hear footsteps and rummaging. At that moment, my heart stopped. I had left the back door unlocked. I knew I had to run to lock it, or else they would come inside. I unlocked the door, sprinted to the living room, and there he was, standing on the other side of the glass and the large bay windows. He just stood there, staring at me. I was frozen. Suddenly, I heard a car pull up outside. My mom was home. The man must have panicked and jumped over the fence. I remained standing there. Let's just say that was the last time I stayed home alone in a long time.
I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from the main roads, and on the weekend, I knew our roads would be remained unplowed for quite some time. I went to my outback deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries, when I noticed footprints leading to my door, then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side and thought that one of their more delinquent kids played a joke as my sledding tube on the railing was popped. I decided I'd wait till later, as it was too early to call their parents. I went on Facebook, and after scrolling for a bit, I noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posted, "Did someone knock for me or something at my back door?" I immediately called her and told her I have an idea. I called the first house on the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, they were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end, and they told me that there were no footprints there. Then I got a call from my next door neighbor. She called the woman that lives next to the end house. She said that there were footprints that led to her door, but none that led away. We'd already called the police by this point, but now we called them back and said that it's an emergency now. They told us the roads are still all unplowed and they can't send a plow truck to clear the way, as they're a privately owned company. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands across the road from her texted her to say he was coming over to invite her over. He came and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all exits. Nothing came out. Around 7 p.m., a plow truck came as well as 3 cop cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They found nothing. She begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the cops went into the basement again. This time, only one came up. He took her to the side room and we could hear hysterical crying. By this point, we were all out there. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man screaming and kicking came out in cuffs and was led away. In this little campout, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone. She sold the house the next summer. The scruffy old man turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The cops told us that they feel like he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck in our unplowed roads. We all were called as witnesses in the case, and he took some electronics from our basement, which they couldn't get him on that since he never left with the stuff. But it was about 4 months of court.
I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large soaps and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get me my needs. I needed to buy a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already have. So, I turned to Craigslist, as I normally do. As a student, I prefer to go for the cheap option. Craigslist usually provides that. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good-looking bag at only £15. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately, what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious he wasn't Scottish or even from the UK. He sounded Polish, I'm still not sure. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was, he offered to come to my house and give me the bag. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my fucking address. He said he'd drop by later on that day, skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m. I was thinking that he wasn't going to come, At around 10:15 p.m., there was a chap at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window to the front door, just to be sure, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a backpack in his hand. Slightly revealed that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened up. It was the guy on the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out £30 because of the trouble he went to come here and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him back. I was still confused that he came all this way just for £15, but I didn't find it overly strange. Boy, was I wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut, which was really weird for this time of the night, and in my area, the nearest house is like a quarter-mile away, and I rarely see the people that live there. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had, but he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I fucking nearly shit myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen, where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, the security light turned on in the back garden. It's a motion sensor that turns it on. I looked up to see, and it was that guy again. He had a creepy smile on his face, no teeth showing, just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa, dude, what the fuck are you doing back there?" He said nothing and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door, then bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at that fact that he's probably making his way into my house. I made a turn to go up the stairs towards the toilet so I could lock myself in there. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and broken glass falling to the floor. He was in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly called the police, told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get officers out to me as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would get there generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach turn. I screamed, "The police are coming. Just back the fuck off, man." After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors outside open fast, and footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then, "Police officer, drop the knife." Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard, "Taser," and the guy screaming, then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempted murder and trespassing. I have pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail, and after that, he will be free to come right back. I am now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible.
So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas. My parents had gotten me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before the cell phone was big. And I'd given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m. and I had been sleeping when my phone begins to ring. I thought, that's odd. Who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So I answered it, but all that could be heard was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. And this time I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. I lay down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the third time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me." This time, there was a reply. It was a man's voice. It sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
And with that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what happened. She woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, makes sure all the locks are on and all the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine. And then he told me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, open my blinds to the window that leads to the backyard, and noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in there, totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police come out to take a report and look at the evidence. They decided they want to go to the backyard. And sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, and back to the back door and back to the front door. And the police think the guy had tried to get into the house.
When I was little, I used to go down to my grandma's house for 2 weeks by myself. We'd roast some marshmallows out back in her huge yard, then come back inside and eat jellies and jams we'd made together. We'd sit on the porch and stare out down at the empty mountains that whistled to us through the pine trees. Her house was perched right close to the top of a mountain, and you could see the misty lake pulled to the bottom. In all my years, the only place that has ever matched the beauty of my grandma's house was the Banff National Park. At night, when the loons sang their song, I could almost hear the bugs skipping across the lake near her cabin. I'd beg my grandma to let me pitch a tent outside, and she would insist that she sleep out there with me and bring her tent out as well. I'd always agree, because truth be told, I was a little scared at first of her backyard. It was grass, flat and green, until you go to the edge of the yard, where tall trees showed up, taller than anything I'd ever seen before. They were planted almost 100 years ago by Boy Scouts. During the day, I'd run down the stairs if I wasn't sleeping in a tent, and the saint would have fresh cold cakes and berries waiting for me. We'd take them outside and eat them on the porch, and I'd tell her about all the places I'd been to. The crackling of the not quite dead fire pit would lull us as we rocked in the chairs, staring out at the vast expanse of land before us. The sky was a mixed palette of blues and faint greens, and the mountain line stretched for miles. I could see the tree that I jumped from into the lake. My grandma would hum softly. It was a game we played, her and I had to guess the tune. Was it going to be Junebug or Sweet Caroline? I always won. I think she let me. The room I stayed in was cozy and had a big bookshelf filled with all kinds of books from all over and from ages ago. I never touched any when I was really young. I was too little to read, and besides, I never really noticed them. The books were too high up anyways. That changed when I got old enough to read. I crawled up to the middle shelf and pulled down the book I thought looked interesting. It was some kind of survival book. I blew on it, 'cause I saw people do that with old books in movies. The front of the book said, "How to survive in the wilderness," surviving like the Indians. Big books for little boys. There was a drawing of an eagle with 2 red lines drawn under each eye. I flipped to the first page. There was no table of contents, nothing. It just said, Chapter 1, How to Start a Fire from Scratch. I flipped through the book about halfway to see what other kinds of things it taught you. This chapter was titled Chapter 25, How to Make a Shelter. It featured a picture of a young Native American boy standing in front of a teepee. Cool, I breathed. I ran down the stairs, book in hand, excited to live out in the great wilderness. My necessities bag was lying next to the door. It was a big old leather backpack stuffed with my grandma's whole compass, my grandma's pocket knife, a few pieces of rope, gum, penny candy, my med kit, a spare sweater, 2 full water bottles, and cans upon cans of fruit and meats. Tucked somewhere into the pocket was a lighter that none of the adults knew I had. I ran out into the forest out back. The sun was hot that day, and it beat down on me. I could feel the sticks crunching under my feet. The forest had gone quiet, which I had learned. There was an apex predator around. I remember how proud that made me feel. I turned around, shaking trees, shouting, knowing that every single thing in the forest was scared of me. It was great. I found a small flat area near the bank of the lake and set up camp. I plopped down on a big rock right in the sun, so I was nice and warm. I opened the book up to the first chapter and got to work reading. I gathered what you needed in small dry things. Within 2 hours, I had a huge pile of sticks in the middle of my clearing and a bunch of dried pine needles, the really long kind. Eventually, I was able to start a fire and I was ecstatic. I ran back through the forest to the house, which was about a 7-minute distance, and begged my grandma to let me spend the night out there. I told her that I had a knife, which was probably not going to help, but she seemed to feel better when I had it. After several minutes of my begging, she caved and said fine, but I had to keep my walkie-talkie on at all times. I think the reason she let me is because there isn't anyone living with a 50-mile radius of her home. I dragged a tent out there and pinched it. The fire was still going strong, but I added a few sticks to it just in case. The moon was shining eerily, blanketing my base in a chilly blue glow. The lake was pitch black, and the stars were shining so brightly they were mirrored in the still water. Trees on every side of me stretched like mammoths towards the sky. I decided to try out some night swimming, and I slowly waded into the water. The warmth was surprising and pleasant. It was a welcome change from the crisp air. The world around me was silent except from the tinkling of the water as it lapped away from me. As I swam, the water continued to make that tinkling sound, which was only silenced when I dove my head underwater. When I opened my eyes underneath, all I could see was black. I swam silently back to the bunk and walked to the fire. I sat that way for a while until I was dry. I threw my sleeping bag and fur blankets into the tent and crawled in, pinching up my small lamp. After a little while, I could hear some wildlife come back out again. The bugs began to chitter, and I heard small animals walking around. Some kind of creature stalked up to my tent and prodded the side with its nose. I heard it chaff and turned to go back the way it came. I was trembling and quietly reached a hand up to shut off my lamp, afraid of attracting new friends. I heard a couple things moving and digging around the tent, but after a while I got used to the sounds of the curious animals and fell asleep. The next morning I could see the sun streaming in through the thin cloth walls, and I unzipped the tent to crawl out. Immediately my head bumped into something. Right in front of the entrance to the tent there was a maybe 3-foot tall branch sticking out of the ground. On the parts that were sticking out of the main branch there were several objects hanging from what looked like a brown thread. Upon closer inspection, I realized that the thread was actually brown human hair, and the dangling objects were small birds' claws and rocks. My breath hitched, and I immediately pushed myself into the tent and zipped it up. I fumbled through my bag to find my pocket knife when I noticed something was off. My sweater was missing. Someone had been in my tent. I heard rustling outside and I froze, pocket knife held in front of me. I counted to 3 and ripped open the tin door. The branch was gone. Whatever put that there was still in the area, and it could see me. I gathered my courage and stepped out of the tent. Almost immediately, an incredibly strong gust of wind almost knocked me over. Before I could recoup myself, I heard a blood-curdling scream, and my guts twisted as something with greasy, stinky long hair and no clothing rushed by me, inches away from my face. It had the basic body shape of a human woman, and yet all similarities stopped there. It had no mouth, toes, fingers, and the torso. Oh God, the torso! It was thin and emaciated, and it had so many ribs, too many ribs. It rushed from the woods on my left side, across my base, and straight in front of me, into the woods on my right side. I don't know where to go, what to do, and thank God awful screech was still ringing in my ears. It left a putrid odor that smelled of boiled cabbage and urine, with a sticky sweet scent on top, as if it was trying to mask its stench. I staggered backwards. The tent was sitting there, and I had the urge to shut myself up in it and never come out again. But instead, I reached and grabbed my bag. I tried my walkie-talkie and I whispered, "Grams, are you there?" There was only static. It had done something to my only source of contact with my grandma. I knew that no matter which direction through the forest I tried to take, no matter how quickly I ran, it would be there. So I took the only way that I knew would keep me away from it. I walked to the bunk and began wading in. The warm water welcomed me back, tugging on my legs, pulling me in. I graciously accepted, all too aware of what was waiting for me back at the tent, what was waving to me rapidly. They found me floating towards the edge of the lake, almost a mile out from my original point. They said I was freezing, and it was a wonder I didn't have hypothermia. The lake kept me alive, but I didn't tell anyone. I knew from that night on I was never the apex predator. For years, I worked as hard as I could and made a life for myself. when they were going to build a resort on the lake. I didn't hesitate to buy the land. I live right next to the old base now. It used to scare me. The creaking boards in my house used to scare me. But now, when I'm afraid, I walk back to the dock and take a swim. I found it calms me. My grandma actually found that book a few years ago and sent it over to me. I opened it just to humor myself. Every single page was blank. I will start out by saying I'm 20 and I've had weird things happen to me since I can remember. I live in Nebraska. I grew up in a house that apparently was built near some burial grounds, which is the only way I think anything ever happened considering we built the house. This is one of my crazier stories when I actually had someone experience it with me. As a child, I remember never feeling alone when I was. There was always something watching me. Things moved in my room on their own. I had a tiny porcelain angel given to me by my dad that has a specific spot, and it'd always be somewhere else when I came back into my room. Something would knock on my doors and walls. I'd get scratched and they'd bleed for hours even though they were tiny surface scratches. Stuff fell over or straight up across the room and doors would slam. When I was in 6th grade, I had a friend spend the night when my family was out with friends and we were alone. My sister used to play scary pranks on me. Her friends would wear masks and knock on my windows and scare at me through a big window in my house. My mom didn't believe in curtains, so anyone could just stare into the house. Damn you, Mom. Anyways, when we were dropped off at my house, the first thing I did was lock every single door. I didn't fuck around as a child, and I knew at this point that the sounds in my home weren't normal, so I was always paranoid and locking everything all the time. So everything is locked and every light is on. But remember, I have 0 curtains or blinds on any of the windows, and it's also December with 2 feet of snow on the ground. We head downstairs and put a movie on. Just some quick info. My house wasn't built well. You can hear what everyone's doing from every single room. I also had a very prissy and sensitive dog who barked when you stood up and constantly growled at any sound she heard. I could not walk into the room without her barking. Annoying, yes, but I also have to think about the shit she saw and heard in that house the hours we were gone. She was down there chilling with me and my friend. This is like 2008, so we still had a landline phone. I had a cell phone as everyone did at that point, and our home phone was never used. There was one in the kitchen, my mom's room, and basement. Halfway through the movie, we heard footsteps upstairs. Cool, my parents or sister was home, and I thought maybe I had the TV up too loud and missed the garage opening up, which was definitely closed when we got home. There was no key to any door, so unless the front door was unlocked, which it wasn't, the garage was the only way in. I turned the TV down and called up to them. Nobody answered, so I called my sister's name, and nothing. My dog is quite annoyed and growling loudly at this point. There is a door that goes outside in my basement, and she's staring at it like she wants to go potty, but I think she was trying to get the hell out of there. I decided to call my parents and sister, and they weren't home. I didn't mention anything to them and quickly hung up. Stupid, right? They never believe the sounds and things that happened to me in the house, so I decided not to bother them with something else. At this point, it's been 5 minutes and they're still walking around, except they are now stomping in what sounds like a circle, like stomping in a circle in the same spot, but it's right above us in the living room. My selfish ass decides to sacrifice my dog and I send her upstairs. This is when I knew something was wrong. She gets up the stairs and sits and begins to whimper when she should be barking her little ass off. As this is hitting me, my cell phone rings and it's my home phone calling me from inside the house. I answer and they hung up right away. I tell my friend to get her shit together because she is crying, and my phone rings again. This time, there's distinct breathing and a wheezing sound like the death wheeze when someone's about to die. I hung up so fast, and when I did, the pounding steps stop. I whisper to my friend to slowly walk to the door that leads outside, and she makes it over to me as I get the door open. I shit you not, this still absolutely freaks me out. As we're about to step our bare ass feet outside, the steps pound to the stairs, and they are booking it down my stairs. They were very fast. I've never jumped into the snow as fast as I did, and I remember a ton of it landing inside the basement, so I was forced to leave the door open. We are sprinting around my house to the street. Part way up the street, something stops me and I turn around. All of the cold air seemed to melt away and pause with me. It was like all of my senses, but my sight just vanished and I froze. There's a figure standing in the kitchen, waving at us. Not like the waving when you see someone you know and you're like, "Hey girl," and waving like an idiot. This was like its elbow was still and its arm was waving side to side, like creepy ass waving. I was only 50 feet away, and I should have been able to make out some details or features about this person, but it was just a black silhouette, as if they were completely painted black from head to toe. It's just fucking waving at me, and I can't take my eyes away. It was unlike any trance I've never been in, and when I come to, my friend is screaming in my face and is trying to pull me away. I call my parents about a mile away from my home when I literally can't feel my feet anymore, and they race home. They walk all around the house, trying before going in, and not only everything is locked, the basement door I left wide open was closed and locked, and all the snow that had come in was gone. Not even a wet spot of carpet, but our footprints were there. It was so fucking odd, and nobody was in the house. No other footprints around the home but ours. This is 100% real. My friend told everyone, and nobody ever wanted to stay at my house, which caused me to have some bad birthday parties, but I completely understand. I still don't know what happened. I'm still paranoid about being alone, but I'm in an apartment now that's very secure. I just wish I knew what had happened that day.